So, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very exciting discussion. We have a great special guest here. We are WVU Online, and this is our session titled Diversity Etiquette in the Online Space. And we are lucky enough to have Rosemary Ketchum as our guest. And we have some predetermined questions that we would like to discuss to give you kind of some tips and some insight on how to be a better ally, and how to be a better student. So Rosemary, if you could just introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly. My name is Rosemary Ketchum. I'm a member of the Wheeling City Council up here in the Panhandle, elected in 2020 as the first openly trans person elected in the state. And we've been doing a lot of great work here in our city, focused on housing and homelessness, focused on public transit and what it looks like to build a more inclusive city for young people and diverse folks here in the state of West Virginia. And I'm excited to have this conversation today.
So let me start there because that was a really great introduction into this topic. So what kinds of things have you done for Wheeling that have made it a more inclusive environment for younger people?
That's a big question. So I think about it in two ways. I think about it regarding kind of informal work and formal work. So, I've been working in the DEI space or the inclusivity space for as long as I've been, had a career, so, as long as I've been involved, both out of a deep desire to kind of create belonging and inclusivity in my community, but also because I also feel like this is something that I need. I remember when I moved to the city of Wheeling, I learned that our community was called the Friendly City. And I decided to take that to heart and make sure that that was a promise we were making every day, and that we were keeping every day. And so in the kind of more informal way, early on, I was part of two organizations that were local LGBTQ groups that held advocacy events and festivals and support groups. I also worked as the associate director of a mental health facility for many years, and we did a lot of really exciting work around LGBTQ inclusivity and what it looked like to build support groups and have kind of open conversations about identity, regardless of gender and sex. I think one of the fascinating things is a lot of people who aren't LGBTQ, they don't think the conversations may apply to them. Like gender and sexuality, that's a them thing, not a me thing. And it's an us thing for sure. And so loved having to do that work. And now working with an organization called the Friendlier City Project, which is an advocacy group focused on LGBTQ issues that primarily works with small businesses to help them kind of learn about kind of state and federal law, but also learn how they can be more inclusive. And so that's what kind of my fun non-government life looks like, and my fun government life looks a little bit differently. What it looks like to pass ordinances and legislation here in our city. We've done a couple of really exciting things to build inclusivity. One of the first things that we did that I was a part of, but not in government, Wheeling passed a non-discrimination ordinance in 2016. And that was a big deal for us. We were one of many cities in the state that did that. In 2016, 2017, West Virginia passed more non-discrimination ordinances than any state in America. And we want to continue that momentum. And very quickly, we also declared racism a public health crisis in 2020. We were the only city in the state of West Virginia to do that, and we're still the only city to do that. And that was a really a point of pride for me and our members of city council. And that also required us to review all of our committees and commissions to ensure that we were engaging in as many diverse voices as possible and pulling people onto these boards and committees to make them more diverse and inclusive. And it also mandated implicit bias training for all of our city employees, both current and future. And then the other thing that we did, the two other things that we did around inclusivity was pass the Crown Act, which essentially, amended our human rights ordinance to ensure that a person couldn't be discriminated based on their hair texture. And then lastly, we banned conversion therapy here in the city of Wheeling. And that was very controversial and tough to get passed, and it wasn't unanimous. But it was very important, not just to me as a member of council or to our mayor, but to community members, both in the advocacy and religious space. They thought this was very important. So those are some of the things that we're doing here in the Panhandle to make good on the promise that we are indeed the friendly city.
Why? Do you think that more cities in West Virginia will follow your lead?
I think so. I think so. We see it as a domino effect. It's always tough to be the first. Nobody wants to be the first because they don't want the backlash of being that. We don't mind being the first in Wheeling. We actually prefer it. We like to kind of push the envelope a little bit. But I think they will follow in our footsteps, as we have followed in the footsteps of Huntington and Charleston and Morgantown. But it won't be easy. And one of the things I hope to do, in my political career, is to really work with other cities to help encourage them to take these on, because usually it feels like we work in silos or in a vacuum. And, even if it passed in Wheeling, if I'm in Parkersburg, it still feels like the first time this has ever happened. And it shouldn't. We should be sticking together as cities, because frankly, we have very little to lose in the state of West Virginia. We've lost so much already. West Virginia in 2020, the 2020 census found that we had the sharpest population decline of any state in the nation. And West Virginia is also the only state to not have grown in population since 1950. The only state in the nation to not have grown in population since 1950. I don't care whether you're gay or straight or Republican or Democrat. That is a mandate on the work that we're doing, and it requires us to do something differently. And I'm really hopeful that we are doing that, and that we will continue to do that in the future.
We hope so too. I think that, I chose to live in West Virginia. And so, I choose to stay here for a lot of the reasons and a lot of the things that you're doing. I love it here, but I want to love it more. And so I think those things, will get us there. But you mentioned inclusivity. And so when the online DEI committee started meeting, one of our initiatives was, how do we make sure that our online students are feeling inclusive in the online space? And we started to talk a lot about the importance of pronouns. And I remember someone saying to me, they had a student in a class that chose to put their pronouns next to their name. And the only reason was because they wanted to make other people in their group feel comfortable. And I thought that was really, I just thought that was just a really great thing that anybody could do. How would you recommend that students go about doing that? Go about, asking what are the correct pronouns? Is there a correct way to do that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And you, I think, touch on it perfectly, that, the conversations around gender identity or sexuality or pronouns aren't limited to one demographic of people, and they should never be. And so anytime that a person who might not identify as LGBTQ engages in a conversation about pronouns, puts them in their email signature, puts them in their bio, I think that's great. Because at that point, it becomes commonplace and really normalized. And really, 5 years ago, it almost didn't exist anywhere. Today, most email signatures have them. And I think that that's just really valuable and helps to make it a non-issue. And, if it's present that way, whether it's gendered pronouns or non-gendered pronouns, they, I think, make it not an issue. So you don't have to even ask at that point. But if somebody does not have them included, I've always erred on the side of asking versus assuming. There are plenty of people who, in my personal life, not in the online space necessarily, who will assume my pronouns. And I would much rather them ask me than get it wrong. Right? It's a little bit more embarrassing for them to get it wrong and then have to clean that up than for them just to go, hey, really quickly, what are your pronouns? When somebody does that, it's a sign of respect, frankly. And it's really a case-by-case basis. If you feel that person is online and you can be comfortable there, you can send them a chat message rather than kind of blasting that over the whole Zoom call. If it's not part of the agenda, that's always something that I think is fair and fun to do. Or one of the ways that you can do that is offer your pronouns, and hopefully they will offer theirs as well. Those are kind of simple things. And I know it's complicated. And for a lot of people who've never had these conversations, and I didn't grow up, frankly, having these conversations, even as a trans person, it's new language. And I think that's okay to be uncomfortable and kind of not get it right all the time. I have misgendered folks on accident in my life, and it's never fun. But it's best to just apologize, get it right, and move on, and really not make it a thing after that.
I think sometimes the simple things are what we can take with us,
Yeah.
so
Sure.
and sometimes that's just it, right? The simplest way is it's going to work. and it's just as easy as asking the question.
Yeah, and I've learned that, people are more willing to give each other grace than we realize. I think particularly people who are chronically online is how I describe it, where we just assume that if we get it wrong, we're canceled and it's the end of the world and we might as well quit our jobs before we get fired. It's usually not that serious. Usually if people see that you're using the tools that you have in your toolbox and you're willing to learn and you're willing to grow, it's about the work, right? And I think by and large, most people are completely understanding and get it. And only if they understand that you're completely understand and you're trying to get it. I think that's that's what I want people to leave with, is that it's a growing experience for all of us, and we just want to make sure that people mean well, and then do better when they can.
And that's something that we at WVU Online talk a lot about is how do we acknowledge that we are actively trying to learn? We are actively trying to be better, and to do this. And so, we've spent a lot of time this past year, particularly making sure that we are sharing those kind of resources that will help our students. So we share a lot of information about, we did Women's History Month, and we were able to share some of the top women graduates of WVU, which was a great series. And it was great to learn about that. And also a lot of mental health resources. And that's our target way to reach our students and our audience. Let me ask you this. Have you ever taken an online class?
I have. So I don't know if you know this, I was homeschooled for the majority of all of my middle school and high school experience. So I was exclusively online from 4th grade until I graduated high school. And so painfully familiar, but pre-pandemic too, before it was cool, with what Zoom and online classes and Blackboard and all of that looks like. So yes, very familiar.
Wow. Okay. Well, I did not. I was not. I don't think I was aware of that at all. We should have done that research, I suppose. So
Not at all.
then you have a really good understanding of online learning. So
Yeah.
what thinking about your history, but also your life now, you're very involved in social media, which I love. You have a great Instagram space. And with your campaigns and things, you have to be involved in social media. What does online diversity look like to you?
I think it is double-edged. And having been in school online for many decades and having, as you mentioned, a social media presence, it is both the best and the worst thing to happen to humanity at the same time. I think the best insofar as that we have access to stories and people and voices and experiences we would never have been able to connect with previously. I mean, just since my election in 2020, I have been able to meet thousands of incredible people that I just would never have connected to. For example, I, was elected, and people learned about my election through social media who lived across the country. And so I would go to a conference in Washington, D.C., and I'd know 3 people from my personal life and 150 people from my digital life. And that is really incredible and inspiring and makes this enormous world very small in I think, a really intimate and incredible way. And so that has been really exciting, and building those connections has made me realize how valuable diversity is, particularly in a place like West Virginia. We are one of the least racially diverse places in America, and we have a lot of work to do to highlight important voices. But I think the digital space really helps us understand that. The other side of that coin is that we develop these silos and these echo chambers where, and that's really not our fault. It's the fault of the processes and algorithms that are built to give us what we want. You know, if I like a video on TikTok, the TikTok algorithm will show me 1,000 videos just like that, or 1,000 videos that people with my similar demographic also liked. And so we have to be very careful when we're online or we're engaging in social media to understand that what I'm seeing, what my For You page looks like, might be very different than what Kimberly's For You page looks like. And so we're not only kind of coming from different backgrounds, but in many ways, since the advent of social media, we are living in different worlds, different digital worlds. And so I think one of the most profound pieces of advice that I've been given for how to deal with online relationships is to go offline, is to actually like take time and maybe travel or do what you can to meet the people you meet online in person. And that's hard and not perfect. But I think that the best way to have a strong online relationship is to have a good offline relationship.
Agree. So thinking back to your classes, what do you think a university class would look like that fully embraces diversity?
Fully embraces diversity. One, I have an anecdote. When I was doing a session years ago with a group of healthcare providers, and they asked the same question: how can healthcare providers become more inclusive? And what they wanted was a big master plan and a kind of 10-year outlook. And those exist, and we should be engaging with those. And I proposed the question to them. I was like, well, what have you done already to make maybe your institutions more inclusive? And I remember this woman, I can't remember if she was a doctor or an RN, but she said, in my office, I have one singular pride flag stuck in a pen cup with all of my other pens. And I don't preface anything. I don't say anything about it. It's just there. And she said, the people who see it, who need to see it, they see it. And she says, I know it could probably be more complicated than that, but that's what I'm able to do right now. And she also mentioned that a mother who has a queer kid, and she was going to this doctor for something related, not to diversity or inclusion, but remarked and said, I'm so grateful that you have that. And it's not loud and it's very simple. I think when we talk about how we make our universities and institutions more inclusive and diverse, there are two sides to this. It's the loud celebration of diversity and inclusivity that is really valuable. And then it is the more mundane, small kind of whispers of belonging and inclusivity. And frankly, I think the latter is almost more valuable. And so a couple of examples of what that might look like, I value an institution that celebrates pride by having pride flags and diverse, photos on the walls. But if their intake forms don't ask what my pronouns are or what my gender identity might be or my preferred first name, I'm like, oh, maybe they don't really understand diversity or inclusion. They just know that, what it looks like rather than what it feels like. Does that make sense? And so there are plenty of times where I'm filling out an intake form and it asks for my sex, or rather it asks for my gender, but they really want my sex. And so I have to just like write in the margins, I think you mean this, but here's what it actually is. And we don't want to have to write in the margins as LGBTQ people or people with other backgrounds. Disability status is one of those key ones as well. There are plenty of intake forms that don't ask whether a person has ADA requirements. And sometimes that's not okay. And we want to make sure that we're being inclusive. Now, we also need to have like really efficient forms. And so we can't ask every question on planet Earth, but there are some really key ones that we could be including there. And then, as you mentioned, Kimberly, making pronouns quite commonplace so that folks don't have to really assume or guess, they can just read it. Those are things that I think are valuable and opportunities to make institutions and universities a little bit more inclusive. And then the last thing I'll say is that, we lived for so long in the kind of don't ask, don't tell space where it was just like, we're okay with you being who you are, just don't tell anybody, just don't talk about it. And so there are still places that have, really kind of terrible policies that say you can't have a photo of your spouse on your desk, those kinds of things. And I know WVU doesn't have those things, but there are other institutions that probably should look at policies and procedures to make sure that they're, again, not distancing any specific demographic, maybe unintentionally in some ways. So I think that's how I think about it, and hopefully folks can engage with those things.
I will say we have a beautiful DEI office. And they do amazing things for not just students, but also for staff and faculty. And so you brought up ADA compliance, and that's something that we work hard with as well, to make sure that our online courses are accessible. And accessible to everyone. And that kind of brings me to this question from a student. As a student in an online course, are there things that I can do to make sure other students feel comfortable? And I know we've touched on, a little bit of that, like maybe it's as simple as putting your pronouns next to your name. But are there other things?
I have a bulldozer outside. I hope that's not bad. The sound isn't bad.
I can't hear it at all.
Oh, good. What can a fellow online student do to make people feel more included?
Yeah.
I think if you're comfortable, I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is kind of tell our own story of belonging, and a time that we didn't feel like we were part of the in-group, or a time that we felt like we didn't belong. And that can have nothing to do with your gender or sexuality. And we all have those stories about a time that you were in a group and you were like, I don't know if these are my people, or I don't think they think that I'm their people. I think those really help bridge our human relationships in a really important way that doesn't get steeped in academia or like getting it right. It's just about kind of telling our individual stories. I think that's really valuable. Asking questions about somebody that are fun and exciting, like, a lot of people listen to music. Asking somebody what their favorite artists are, again, that helps break down a lot of the worries and fears about what it looks like. Oh gosh, I want to get it right and make sure I'm asking the right questions. And frankly, a lot of LGBTQ people in particular, there's a kind of fatigue with every day feeling like you have to be, okay, I want to make sure that I make people feel comfortable, so that they don't feel like they have to act differently around me because they want to get it right, if that makes sense. And I surely feel that among folks where I'm really conscious of the way that I'm thinking, and I want to make sure that I say everything correctly. And that can really be stressful and take a lot of energy. And so any way that we can help disarm people and make a space feel comfortable, while also treating people with respect and dignity, frankly, is really, really important. And sometimes that looks like a disclaimer, to say that, hey, I don't know what that disclaimer might look like, but it could, be something like, hey, this is a space of learning, and sometimes we're not always going to get it right. And I want to make sure that we feel like we can call each other in rather than call each other out on things that we might get wrong. And that is, I think, really helps set the tone. And I don't think that kind of those disclaimers or setting the tone only has to come from an administrator or a teacher or somebody who is the host of that Zoom call. I mean, we all have the opportunity, and I think the accountability, rather the obligation, to say, hey, I want to make sure that we all feel comfortable here. And here's what that looks like for me. And if I do or say anything or assume anything that isn't correct, call me in, because I want to be right.
I immediately thought of, I know the question was directed towards kind of what students can do, but I immediately thought of how great your suggestions are for instructors as well. Because you can, the beginning of a class, you've got to introduce yourself, and maybe you have to do that, maybe you have to do that online, particularly if you're, that's the type of course that you're taking. There's a way that instructors can ask questions that could be designed to build comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to say one more thing, that those disclaimers, or setting the tone, or just creating a space of belonging, they're even more powerful in classrooms or in departments or in kind of admin spaces that never get that. And so the first thing that came to mind was I spoke to a group of HVAC students, and they never get conversations about pronouns. And I was a little nervous, like, oh gosh, all of these 25-year-old guys, I'm going to ask what their pronouns are, and I hope they're going to be cool with it. And they were chill as hell. They were totally fine. And they were like, a little bit, I think, they thought it was refreshing, because it's usually like the gender spaces, the queer spaces, the diverse, stereotypical spaces where we just like, you know, kind of pat ourselves on the back and say like, oh, we did it. It's really the other spaces that never get it. And we should probably be engaging in those. And so I guess that's a challenge to anybody who is maybe instructing a class that is maybe less diverse or not stereotypically engaging in kind of equity work. Maybe have those conversations as a little opportunity to set the tone. It can be fun.
I bet that HVAC class was fun.
They were great. I loved them.
You have to, I mean, you have to love it when audiences surprise you, you know, because we all go in with a little bit of a bias. And actually I want to take you back, because you mentioned that the city of Wheeling had implemented implicit bias training. And that is something that Jennifer particularly has talked about in our committee meetings before, because I think she took a class at Ohio State, perhaps, right, in implicit bias training. Can you talk a little bit about implicit bias?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite conversations to have, because it is one of the most misunderstood, I think. Jennifer, if there's anything that you want to add, please do. I think, as we mentioned before, conversations about race or gender identity or sexuality, for many people that don't engage in that every day, and I realize, again, we are in our own bubble because these are conversations we're comfortable with and we really enjoy. There are many people in my life who will never sit on a Zoom call and talk about gender identity and inclusion, and it makes them very uncomfortable, not because they necessarily, you know, feel a certain way about it, but they feel uncomfortable because they don't feel like they have the right language or the toolbox, or they feel like, you know, the culture is 10 steps ahead of them, and they haven't necessarily maybe done the work to get there. And so, or they're only using the tools that they have in their toolbox. And I think those folks really have black and white thinking, in the sense that, like, if I get it wrong, I'm a bad person. If I get it right, I've only gotten it right once, and I'll get it wrong the next time. As opposed to, and this is like really key when we have conversations about racism versus implicit bias, and, you know, being able to say, not everybody is perhaps racist, but everybody has some kind of implicit bias, whether it is about the way the person looks or the way a person sounds or where a person is from. I mean, it could be the smallest, most kind of minuscule demographic information about a person, but we're human beings and we love to categorize. It's just part of our DNA. And sometimes it really is helpful in life, because it can be correct, and sometimes it's really harmful. And I have engaged in conversations about implicit bias with folks who didn't know the term or the concept existed, and it was relieving to them. It felt like a kind of a weight was lifted off their shoulder, because they were like, oh, I get that. Sometimes it's not my fault. Sometimes it's because of my environment or the parents that I grew up with, but it is my responsibility to call myself out on some, as Cheryl was mentioning, just like always being hyper aware of how we perceive the world and observe the world, and what kind of biases that we're building on the world, and being able to talk about those very clearly. It's still really kind of uncomfortable. And one of the examples that I think I was listening to a TED Talk about a white woman talking about walking down the street with Black men oncoming, and she would cross the street, and she didn't even think about it. It wasn't part of her. She just did it. And then afterwards, she felt guilt. She was like, why did I do that? Maybe it was because I didn't feel safe, but why didn't I feel safe? Maybe it was because it was dark outside and I didn't know who that was. And she came to the conclusion that I'm not racist, but I might have some implicit bias that I need to be considering or thinking about. And we're human beings. Sometimes it's just our lot in life to have to deal with these things. But one of the, I think, challenges that we should be really giving to one another is to think about those, every single day, whether it is about race or about something else. Class is a big one, implicit bias, what we think about people who make less or make more than we do. I have my own implicit bias about people who make more than I do, right? And so those are things that we need to be always considering. And I think it plays a part in universities and institutions because we are full of biases when it comes to education and class. So I guess another opportunity to set the tone and to really build maybe even a course on what it looks like to open up about those biases, but also dispel them.
I think that's awesome. I think I've worked in enrollment positions for 15 plus years at this point now. And I feel like the teams I've worked with, led, supervised, like I always feel like this is a big thing to kind of set the tone with them, because a lot of times they're the front line of the university. And so they might not be aware of these thoughts that they're not even really aware of, like your example with the woman kind of crossing the street. So I feel like it's super important to have, staff do some trainings and just to heighten that awareness. You mentioned at the beginning of this, like kind of toolboxes are limited and they're only kind of working with what they might have or what they know or what they've been exposed to so far. Are there resources or any tools or things that you would recommend for people, like if they do go through like implicit bias training or just in general, just to kind of become more comfortable with these topics and anything kind of surrounding that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yesterday, I was at a fundraiser event for a local organization that we have, and I was sitting next to a faith leader, a pretty prolific one in our community, and she was like, "Rosemary, you'll never guess what I experienced yesterday." And I said, "What?" She was like, "Two separate parents who don't know each other came to me to tell me that their kid came out as trans, and they were looking for information, and they wanted to get it right, and they wanted to be thoughtful, but they also wanted to engage in an experience that also integrated their faith with their child." And I was like, that is so fascinating. And this faith leader said, I didn't know what to tell them. Besides the work that I do, I didn't know where to lead them or what kind of information to give them beyond that. And so they asked me for some advice and what I would do. And we do, surprisingly perhaps, have quite a few resources at our disposal here in the state of West Virginia and I think in the region as well. A couple of the things that come to mind on the advocacy side that I'm most familiar with include Fairness West Virginia. Fairness West Virginia is a statewide organization in the advocacy and political space. It's really focused on building policies and working with legislators to ensure that West Virginia is becoming inclusive. We also have the WVU LGBTQ Center with Brad and the team, which is such an incredible group of folks there that I, really admire. I just had the opportunity to speak with Ellen Rodriguez a couple weeks ago in Morgantown, I think it was. And the resources there are just really impeccable, both in the advocacy space, but also the medical space and the referral space as well. In the region that isn't in West Virginia, but up here in the Panhandle, we have in West Washington, Pennsylvania, something called the Central Outreach Wellness Center. And I've worked in collaboration with them for many years. They are a medical facility that provides therapists and HRT and all kinds of other important medical resources for folks. They also accept Medicaid, which is really key and not often, typical. And so I really enjoy those. And then just throughout the state, we have various pride organizations. I'm thinking of Out MOV, the Friendlier City Project, Charleston Pride, Huntington Pride, lots of organizations that are due. Parkersburg has their own pride, and their capacity might be limited and they might not be formal 501c3s, but they do offer an opportunity to meet other people in the LGBTQ space and also kind of build some camaraderie there. And then one more thing that came to mind was Dr. Rainbow. Dr. Rainbow is an online resource of West Virginia organizations, institutions, businesses that are LGBTQ affirming. And so I know a lot of folks will come to me and say, hey, I want to get married, but I don't know any officiants who will officiate a same-sex marriage. And I will, send them to Dr. Rainbow because there are often really, really great resources there.
Sorry, I will up the bulldozer in your yard with my dog.
Yay.
Sorry about the bark. Thank you for asking that, Jennifer, because as soon as Rosemary said toolbox, I wrote it down. Because I think I've always loved, the metaphor of a toolbox. And I think that's something that we can actually take from this conversation and actually make and provide to our online students. That is something that we can do. And it's something that I'm sure the DEI office already probably has. So maybe we can just, we can add to that, because we're all about sharing the resources, all of the resources, because we want to make sure that our students have what they need, but that they also feel included in the WVU environment. That's always been our goal. Even if you're an online student and you are in Texas or Washington or Florida, that you still feel like you're included in the WVU campus. And so we work really hard at that. And I think that you have given us some really great advice and some really great tools that we can provide to them. So I just have one last question for you. And it's probably a little bit of a personal question, but with all of the work that you've done for Wheeling, and which will no doubt extend throughout the state of West Virginia to make the entire state better, what are your goals for maybe the next year or two?
Thank you for this question. As I mentioned before, we are at an inflection point in West Virginia, and there are certain things that we need to get right, or else I really fear that we're going to miss an opportunity here, not just an opportunity for the people who do live here and the people that we need to be, serving and working with, but the people who might look at West Virginia as a place where they can start a family or they can start a small business and decide not to because of what they read on social media or what they Google or what our state legislature decides to do or what certain institutions decide to engage in. It's really important that we are working together to get it right. A couple of the things that we're working on here in the city of Wheeling include homelessness and housing. When I was elected, homelessness was one of the #1 issues that constituents would reach out to me about. And constituents would say, 10 years ago, this wasn't a blip on my radar. But now it is, almost overnight in their experience, seemed to become one of our biggest problems. And in my opinion, if this was a housing issue alone, we would be able to fix this. We'd be able to build enough housing for the people who need it. But we know this is a complex and multifaceted issue that includes a need for housing, a need for affordable and quality housing, but also a need for serious behavioral health care and mental health care for the people who need it. It also requires a reforming of our criminal justice system in many ways. We are arresting people in mental health crisis for criminal offenses that in any other country might be considered absolutely unethical. And so we also need to be supporting law enforcement to be able to ensure that they have the capacity and the tools and the funds, frankly, to work with mental health providers. We also know this is an opioid crisis result. And all of those things make this a very complicated issue. And frankly, the way that we talk about it is this is a federal issue begging for a local solution that just does not exist. I mean, we're treading water in Parkersburg, Huntington, Morgantown, Wheeling, and thankfully we are working together in some capacity, but that is something that we're focused on. A couple of the other issues include public transit, which does also lend to the conversation of homelessness and poverty. We need a functioning public transit system, and we're working on that every single day. Small business is something also that I care very deeply about. We are so used to extractive industries coming into West Virginia that'll promise us the world and say, here's 300 jobs, and maybe we get those jobs, maybe we don't. But 10 years down the line, we've seen it time and time again that economic viability or vitality really does dry up. And yet, when these industries might leave us or might extract from us, our small businesses stay, and they might struggle and they might need more support, but they are committed to our communities. And so being able to provide small business support and also incubation support for people who say, I'm not a millionaire, I don't have a degree, an MBA, I don't have an accounting degree, but I really have a good idea and I have a work ethic and I want to start a small business. I just need a space and I need some starter funds. We want to be able to support those people too. And frankly, say, we want to pull everybody from the rest of the state to Wheeling. We need as many people as we can get doing good work here because we're very competitive here in the Friendly City, and we want to lead the state in all of these ways, both economic, but also cultural.
You make me want to move to Wheeling. I think I've said.
Oh, watch out.
Well, Rosemary, thank you so much for your time today. We are absolutely thrilled to have you and cannot wait for this. This will go live next Wednesday for Diversity Week. And we at WVU Online and WVU Main Campus, just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, the three of you, for all that you do. I'm so grateful to the institution, and any way that I can collaborate in the future, let me know.